When I first joined Governor Christie's administration in 2010, one of the first things that I worked on was analyzing RGGI, going through their auctions, and which ultimately led to Governor Christie's decision to pull out of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. As you probably all know, when Governor Murphy was elected, one of the first things he did was to bring New Jersey back in to RGGI. It's now been about 7 years since that decision was made, and a lot has happened in the energy market. A lot has happened with RGGI. Here to talk about where we stand with RGGI and how it's working is Jason Lemme, Managing Director of Hartree Partners. Jason.
So, I am Jason Lemme. I work at Hartree Partners. Hartree is a partnership, and we are simply a commodity merchant trading firm. What does that mean? All we do is, just think of it this way, it's just moving a commodity from point A to B, or from time A to B, i.e. you're moving things geographically or you're storing them, right? And so commodity trading, whether it's in energy commodities or soft commodities like cocoa or soybeans or whatever it is, it's a game of logistics, right? So you have storage, you have pipelines, you have wires, you have ships, and so it is a market of anticipation. It is a global market. It is a market that requires a tremendous amount of research. I run our gas and power trading business in North America, and I've been with the company for almost 25 years since school, and I'm a fellow Rutgers alum. I am from New Jersey. I went to Rutgers. I've raised my family here. I love the state. I work in New York. And one of the things we've done in the last few years is we've bought an asset in New Jersey called Newark Energy Center, which is the most efficient natural gas-fired power plant in the state and probably one of the most efficient ones in the region. I'd also like to thank NJBIA for letting me speak today, because as I've been involved in the commodity trading market for a long time, and as I've been involved in power specifically, I've learned a lot about emission schemes globally, in Europe, in Australia, in California, Washington, and also in the Northeast. And we have a unique one here in the Northeast, right? And so just very quickly, a cap and trade scheme, if you're not familiar, I'm sure you've heard about it, but very simply, it's this idea where the first one, I believe, was for SO2 emissions, sulfur emissions, from the 70s and 80s, because Midwest power plants were emitting sulfur that wound up raining in the US and created acid rain around here, which I grew up in New Jersey, and that I remember having that once in a while in the early 80s. And how the scheme works is the regulator, the government, gives out a certain number of credits each year, and the emitters have to buy or are given the credits. And then each year, that bank of credits goes down until you eventually get the abatement you want. Now, from a policy standpoint, it's kind of maybe great because you could get revenue from it and you're kind of keeping your hands out of it. However, you only control the supply side of the equation. You don't control the demand and you don't control the price. So when you levy a tax on something, you may or may not like it, but at least you know the price of it, right? In this case, you cede that to the market, and the market's going to behave in whatever accordance the construct of the market has. In this case, RGGI is a multi-state scheme. All the green states you see there are in it. The blue states were in it, or were toying with being in it, or were in it and then got out of it, whatever it is, they're not involved anymore. Also, in the case of RGGI, each state has its own, so RGGI has a rule base, and then each state has a law that follows the rules. And then there's basically a group, like the RGGI Inc. group, that essentially sets the rules on what takes place in the multi-jurisdictional scheme, okay? And what each state does with the revenues differs. So like in New Hampshire, there's a rule that all the money has to be redistributed back to ratepayers somehow. In New Jersey, all the money goes to things like electric garbage trucks or whatever else that are not being built in the state. So a little bit of a deadweight loss for us in this state. Now, I want to talk about one major flaw in RGGI. And I'm going to talk about a few things, but this one's very important because when you do a scheme like this, you have to think about where you are. And I don't know a lot about geography, but New Jersey's very narrow, right? It's not a big state. So when you have a cap and trade scheme, say, across all of Europe, in order to compete and undercut Europe, i.e. like leakage, that's what we call it in these schemes, leakage. It's shifting production to jurisdictions that don't have to bear the cost. If you're in Europe, it is much harder to subvert all of Europe, especially if they have a scheme that puts a moat up around it, than it is in a state that's 100 miles wide, right? And so what we have is this RGGI scheme was initially somewhat effective in getting rid of already very inefficient, say, coal plants. So there were like a handful of plants in New England and in Maryland, not really in New Jersey, that kind of went away in the early days of the program. Since then, there have not been really many or any retirements of power plants in the RGGI states. And what we've also seen is that each cluster of states has different situations. So if you're in New England, way up there, you're protected in a sense because you have Canada to your north, which is in a different country, different grid altogether, and you have New York who's in the scheme. But if you're in New Jersey, Maryland, or Delaware, Pennsylvania can undercut you very easily, right? And so the Pennsylvania power generation can basically outcompete the New Jersey or Maryland or Delaware power generation simply because they don't have to bear the cost, okay? All right, so I want to talk about also some other issues with the scheme here. And these are the things, I have to admit, kind of have fired me up over the last few months as I've seen the price go up in an uncontrolled manner. And you don't see this as a ratepayer because it's part of the market clearing price for power, which I'll get into in a moment. But the one thing you should know is that the power price clears not at the average, but at the marginal price, at the marginal generator. So if the marginal generator has to bear a higher cost or is much less efficient, the price is going to be that much higher for everything, okay? And that's how markets clear in general, and there's no exception in the power market. So obviously, I put the chart up there not so that you can read through the numbers on the Y and X axis. The point is the direction, right? This thing's gone up tenfold in not such a long period of time. And it's gone up there for a few reasons. And I think it's personally a powder keg that's not going to get fixed for a little while, okay? Several reasons. One is the bank. Remember I said initially, when you have a carbon trading scheme, there's initially an allotment that goes out and then declines over time. Well, as years go by, if you don't use all that allotment, you build up a bank. And then the bank sort of declines over time until you eventually run out of that. Okay? And now we do know when supply runs out of something, the price tends to go up a lot. Now, to accelerate the decline in the bank, the RGGI program removed about 95 million tons unilaterally in 2019 to get rid of what was considered an overhang. What this did was this created the lowest bank to demand ratio of any carbon scheme in the world. The bank to demand ratio should be about 1.25 typically in these schemes to accommodate hedging in the market, people holding inventory for multiple years, whatever else. Ours is 0.65, right? So in other words, you already are off to an upward trajectory on price as a result of that bank adjustment. There are no price or position limits on RGGI. There is a mechanism called the cost containment reserve. The cost containment reserve says if you exceed a certain price, we'll give you a few more credits. But after that, there is nothing to hold back the price. Now, think about this also. 56% of outstanding credits at the moment are held by non-compliant entities. So you have no price limits, you have no position limits, and it's a free-for-all on who could participate in this market. So I've been trading commodities for about 20 years. And I look at this, and I try to look at it objectively, and I say, I don't know a single commodity on the planet where the people holding all the inventory are the same people who set the price, right? That'd be like giving OPEC the futures market and say, go set the price after you set the supply, right? It seems insane to me that you have no price limits, no position limits, and no limits on non-compliant holdings. And to top it all off, at least in my mind, is I'm not sure really who's watching the hen house, right? So in futures trading, there's and in physical commodities trading, there's very robust regulatory mechanisms. We go through very stringent compliance internally, and the oversight in the markets is very aggressive. So in commodity futures trading, you have the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. In physical gas and power, you have the FERC. And there are very strict rules on how you're supposed to behave in the markets, right? Particularly in the nexus between those two things. The CFTC governs Reg futures trading. I'm not exactly sure in this multi-state structure who oversees what happens in the Reg physical trading and the cross-pollination of those two markets together. When you have a multi-state structure, all I've seen is a quarterly report from a consultant that tells me basically a copy-paste job of the prior event of what has been taking place, but it's not clear to me anyone's really watching who's doing what or why they're doing it. And so, is it any wonder between all these things that you've seen the price go up? Now, I just want to show you some data points now on what we've seen in this past few years, but particularly in this last year. As the price has gone up for Reggies, the last auction cleared $25.75 per ton. What does that really mean, though? Like, how do we put this in real terms? That comes out to about, depending on the energy efficiency of the power plant who has to comply with Reggie, that comes out to about $11 per megawatt hour adder to the energy price, okay? Now, natural gas prices are relatively low right now. Call it $1.30, $1.40, $1.50, I don't know, right? It's essentially because the Marcellus gas field is right down the road. And so when you take the efficiency of the natural gas power plant and you add this $11 adder to it, it turns out in many hours of the day, in many months of the year, the cost of power is over 50% or nearly 50% derived simply from the Reggie adder. And remember, the price of power is determined at the margin. So that applies to every megawatt hour that clears, okay? Now, if you look at the bottom left, I want you to remember the numbers. You see the 7.22 and the 8.22? That's the efficiency of power plants in New Jersey and Pennsylvania on average. Now, what does that mean? That's the number of units of gas you need to produce 1 unit of power, okay? So the lower it is, the more efficient it is. Pennsylvania is less efficient than New Jersey. Pennsylvania has lots of efficient power plants, but they're always running. Just like many of the power plants in New Jersey, because they're efficient, should be running. On average, though, the Pennsylvania power plants are 1 heat rate unit higher, 8.22. That's pretty significant, actually. Because all the efficient plants are running in Pennsylvania, it's the extremely inefficient, the ones that are way over 8.22, that are on the margin contributing. So we'll get to that in a second, but I want to show you that for this reason. Now, don't bother trying to look at every number in the grid. What I want you to see is that as the Reggie price goes up, you can see where gas is at $1.50. As the Reggie price goes up, the competitiveness of New Jersey efficient power plants declines, okay? That's the red bit there, okay? So what we're seeing is, now, obviously, if natural gas prices went up and coal prices didn't move, it's a free market. They're gonna outcompete natural gas power plants, no problem. When you put the Reggie wedge in there, you create scenarios that as the price goes higher, it becomes more economic for coal plants in Pennsylvania to run. Likewise, if you look at the chart on the right, we try to do an analysis of inefficient gas plants versus efficient gas plants. So if you look, when the RGGI price is 0, if it's green, see that little green dot on the top left? That means New Jersey plants head-to-head are competing effectively, right? But as you go higher on RGGI prices, you allow more inefficient Pennsylvania power plants to run. And so if the price, which it was on the futures market, was over $27 over the summer, you're essentially turning on every inefficient natural gas power plant in Pennsylvania at the expense of running an efficient natural gas plant in New Jersey, which makes no sense to me. This is the data when you look at imports. Now, New Jersey is generally a net importer of megawatts from Pennsylvania, okay? And you can see it's very seasonal. Goes up in the winter, down in the shoulder season, back up in the summer, down, up again, okay? Is it any wonder that our imports are a lot higher this year now, that the price is much higher? It's unequivocally higher, right? And you can see the little dotted lines, the green one, the blue one, that's the RGGI price. As it's gotten higher, the wedge has grown, and we've imported more power from these markets. So empirically, the data support what we're saying. Now, I did not even temperature adjust this data. If we did, it would look more stark, okay? And then we did an analysis, and we said, what is, and we were generous, because we used that average Pennsylvania heat rate, but if we use the actual heat rate, remember I said the most efficient plants in Pennsylvania are already running. So the ones that are being called on to run in this market are the less efficient ones, but we were even generous with that. And we estimated that this year you will have 4 million tons more carbon emissions globally as a result of this than you would have without it, right? Because you are turning on gas plants and at extreme cases, coal plants that are increasing emissions versus lower heat rate plants in New Jersey. So I wasn't the first person to think about this issue. And the founding fathers of RGGI in New Jersey had thought about what would happen if prices went higher. And in the law in 2008, there's a clause here that says, if the price for 2 consecutive auctions exceeded $7, that they'd have to have a hearing and provide ratepayer relief. I mean, we've been over $7 for 16 quarterly auctions. And so it wasn't without notice to the designers that there could be an economic hardship that comes from this situation. We are well over that at this point. And so the wedge that's created is rather substantial. Now, remember, we're increasing emissions, but we're also paying higher power prices as a result. What's embedded in your power price, your energy price, is this RGGI adder. You just don't see it, right? Because it's in the clearing price of wholesale power, which then gets thrown into your bill, and then you have all the other charges, and you wouldn't even know as a ratepayer or as a business owner. But we estimate that at that $25.75 price, that ratepayers in New Jersey will pay $800 million more for power while contributing to 4 million tons more of carbon emissions. And so, like I said from the beginning, I grew up in this state. I raised my family in this state. I find it insane that we're sending money to other states to grow carbon emissions and reduce our competitiveness. And I'm very concerned about where the price of this program goes in the future, because the guardrails that generally govern where the market for supply and demand should go are not present in this market. And it will be the case that the people who make the rules that change the program, i.e. the program reviews for RGGI, are not going to move faster than the market on this. They will be reactive, and at the end of the day, it could be extremely costly for us. Sorry for the upper. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but this is a topic that has sort of confounded me as I sat there and put all these data points together, and I found it sort of perplexing in that the program doesn't seem to be doing what it should be doing. And honestly, I think it's, at the beginning of the program, I think the intent was there. I think the result was very good. But because the states are so different now in the RGGI system, the one-size-fits-all just does not seem to work. And the harbinger for this is not Europe, it's Maryland, where they are losing capacity, they are importing more, and the resiliency payments that power plants are supposed to get, their clearing price cleared twice ours, almost twice ours, in the last auction, basically the power capacity auction. And I don't want to say all of it is related to RGGI, but I think a major contributing factor to the lack of competitiveness for Maryland power plants is this program. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry, why don't you take the microphone, because I'm probably not going to be able to hear you.
Are you suggesting that New Jersey get out of RGGI?
I knew I'd be asked this either here or not. And I honestly don't know. I am of the belief that we do have to reduce carbon emissions. We bought the most efficient power plant in New Jersey with the eye that demand was going to grow because of data centers, AI, electrification. But we also knew that any solution on carbon emissions would have to involve natural gas and flexible natural gas. And so the thesis was that we would buy the most efficient plant we possibly could. And that plant can't even run right now. So I don't know the solution. Thankfully, I don't have to make the sausage in Trenton or in the RGGI scheme. I just wanted to bring it to everyone's attention to let them figure out what to do with it. But it is a very big concern right now. Sure. We do? Okay. We have time for one, or? Oh, okay. I thought you saw one. Sorry. Oh, I see a hand over here. Go ahead.
I don't know if you have the answer to this, but do you have like a percentage delta in what this is going to do for cost to businesses that are massive consumers of energy?
I don't.
Even a ballpark?
I've thought about trying to bring this back to what an average bill would look like, but I think I'd have to make so many assumptions. And if you are a business owner here, you have so many, you might be in an energy-intensive business or a non-energy intensive business, so I didn't want to make any assumptions for the audience. I did want to highlight the $800 million number as a statewide cost, but I didn't want to take a stab at how I would think about it for an average consumer, an average business.
Is it, I'm sorry, can I ask a follow-up? Is it safe to assume the time horizon for this is going to be through, is it through 2030 based on your
It's
charts?
indefinite.
It's
indefinite.
going to continue as long as we're participants in this process.
Right, and it's going to be dependent on the price of the credit. If the price of the credit were to go down, that cost would go down. If it were to go up, the cost would go up. And it will, because of our proximity to non-RGGI states, i.e. Pennsylvania and Ohio, but Pennsylvania is obviously the closest one, it's not going to go away.
Thank you.
There's one more question. Are we good? Okay.
Thank you. So a lot of the leakage issue that you brought up has to do with Pennsylvania not being in RGGI. And we know that Pennsylvania has a court case going on to join RGGI and also a bill that would do something similar. So if Pennsylvania did join, how would that impact the situation?
It moves, it doesn't, it's a great question. Having observed the Pennsylvania back and forth for the better part of the last 5 years, I'm very skeptical of them getting into the program. If they were, I think what would happen is the same principle would apply, but it would shift to Ohio and West Virginia, who are also in the PJM grid. Okay, I think that's great. Thank you very much. Take care.